I hope you found the movie as emotionally moving and uplifting. Emotional roller coaster. Very appropriate as we celebrate this Martin Luther King holiday weekend. I wanted to welcome all of you again on behalf of the forum, those who didn't hear me if you were downstairs. We are a nonprofit whose mission is to bring speakers who can address a thorny issue in our community, provide an unusual perspective, or perhaps inspire us to act, which I think this film falls into the latter category. Our tradition has been to screen a documentary film in January. However, the last time we were able to do that was in 2020, of course, because of the pandemic. So we're very, very happy to be back here at this wonderful Millerton Moviehouse this morning. All of our programs, as most of you know, are free to the public, which is why your contributions are very important to us. And we thank all of you who have responded to our emails or letter in the mail, snail mail, this year. And if you haven't, we encourage you to go to our website, salisburyforum.org, and make a contribution in any different number of ways. You could also hand one of us a check this morning if you have one. I actually have one already. One of our goals is to partner with other local organizations to continue the conversations. And next Saturday, January 21st at 4 p.m. at the Scoville Memorial Library in Salisbury, Chris King, who is the acting chief and senior political affairs officer for the Weapons of Mass Destruction branch at the United Nations, will be at the Scoville Library at 4 p.m. to host a conversation on nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Mr. King will present his information on the current rising risks of nuclear weapons that we haven't seen since the Cold War, and the efforts to control their use and eventually eliminate them. His remarks will be followed by a 40-minute Q&A session. So please go to the scovillelibrary.org website to register. I also would like to say that you will have gotten an email from us as this film started this morning, noting that this film will be available online. So if you have friends and family who would like to see it, it will play for 24 hours, starting Tuesday at noon through Wednesday at noon. So please check out your email and send it on to family and friends. And now I want to introduce the producer and director of this film, and we're going to be with us right now for Q&A from all of you. Susan Strickler is director of The Vow from Hiroshima, and the producer, Mitchie Takeuchi. Susan, on your left, is an independent television and theater director whose first documentary is this film, The Vow from Hiroshima. She has been with ARC Media since 2010, and before then she directed a number of television shows. And Mitchie, as we all know from the film, has been a New York City-based, well, you might not know this, she's been a New York City-based media consultant for 25 years. As we do know from the film, her grandfather, Ken Takeuchi, the military surgeon, and her mother both survived the bombing in 1945. And as also we have learned from the film, Mitchie works with the organization Advocacy Stories to pass on the legacy of the atomic bombings. The other big news I wanted to share with you this morning that Susan just let us know is that this film has just been selected by public television. So it will be there. I'm sure most of you know this is truly the holy grail for any documentary film producer, so congratulations. We're going to have about 40 minutes for Q&A, so without further ado, let's get started. Susan and Mitchie.
Thank you.
Anybody has questions? I think that the acoustics in here are fine without a mic. If not, we'll be able to hand this one off to you. Anybody want to start us off?
Well, is she still alive?
If it's possible, if you could stand, I think it would help us hear your question.
Well,
You heard it. Simon just asked if Setsuko is still alive, and yes, she just celebrated her 91st birthday. January 3rd.
Susan, my question for you is, how did you come to this amazing story?
Well, as with most documentaries, you kind of start with an idea. Mitchie introduced me to Hibachi Stories and Setsuko, and over several years I got to know her work very well. And then what you see portrayed is that after the conference on the prohibition of, on the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons in Vienna in 2014, she was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. It was the 70th anniversary, and there was also the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which meets every 5 years, was meeting in New York, and she was a real big part of everything that was going on there. And so we had talked in Vienna about what was her next step, because at that time she was 83 and had been traveling all over the world, talking. And she said, I'm not really a writer. I don't see myself sitting down and writing my autobiography. And so I had suggested that I would help her find somebody to make a documentary about her. I was a television director, and really honestly, I didn't think it would be me. But then things started to happen. It was just like, well, somebody's got to do this. We had no money, we had no script, we had nothing, and we just were like, just start shooting, And that's what we did. And little did we know that, first of all, we thought it'd be a year and a half. We were going to do Setsuko's story. Mitchie never intended to be in it. I know, she had a broken arm from my twisting it.
I have something that I like to talk about that too, because I really did not mean to be in it. And also, I think it's actually a real good story that why I did not want to be in it.
Yes.
I hesitated because I don't mean to carry on. Sorry, but I did not want to break my mother's silence, for example. Plus the fact that Setsuko Thurlow is my alma mater of the school. We are going to talk the story about her life. And now, how could I possibly be in it? So the whole production procedure, I was in this constant hesitation and resistance. So Susan really had to work hard. Her partner, Mitchie Takeuchi, to be as supportive and as cooperative as possible. That was a big job. Thank you, Susan.
Well, I think in a way, the impetus to have Mitchie be in it, she's from Hiroshima, and how could she not have been involved in this movement? And then we met all these people who were so dedicated and were not grandchildren and children of survivors. And I felt, Setsuko in a way is almost so perfect, and that her commitment for her entire life is something that I think very few people could achieve, and might even feel like, I can't do that, so I'm not going to get involved, But when you have somebody like Mitchie, who was adjacent to this issue her whole life and didn't really take it on, I felt like if she can join it, at a later stage in life, then we all can do it. And I thought that was really a good juxtaposition of the two stories, of the person who was successful at it her whole life, and somebody who really resisted. And I think that the balance, I think it worked, and Mitchie's story is very moving, and then it's also part of the story too that the Hibakusha frequently do not speak of it, and so Setsuko is the exception, not the rule, and so I think we needed to represent that.
I just am unclear why it's almost shameful why people were quiet that were survivors.
Okay, well, that's an excellent question, thank you. Well, that's a very good question. And then in a nutshell, because of the uncertainty of the impact of radiation, there are a lot of stigma that was attached to being exposed. For example, women who are exposed to could have deformed children. That could go on for generations. Anyone who survived the atomic bomb might be sickly all their lives. Thus, they may have problem finding jobs. And that was very difficult time, challenging time for Japanese after the World War II. So overall, survivors decided to hide the fact that they were exposed. Plus, another thing was that in the film, we talk about the media censorship that was exercised by the occupation force. That means that nuclear weapon issue were kept very locally, only known in Hiroshima and Nagasaki area. Thus, the rest of Japanese population were not informed about what exactly happened. Therefore, that also created amazing opportunity for people to speculate. And Japanese culture tend to have this tradition of blaming on victims in general. So that also expedited this stigmatism that was attached to whole disaster.
The silence.
Silence, yeah.
Yes.
We saw visions of this film being shown to high school students. I have two questions. Sorry. How do we get all the schools in the country to see this? And what was your thinking about middle school age, if you have any thoughts?
Well, as far as getting it out, I mean, that's what we have been working on since we finished the film. I mean, of course we had COVID, so right as we were about to hit the film festival circuit, they were all canceled or went viral, so we weren't able to go and sort of do what you do when you finish a film. But we've been diligently working, and now it's a big deal that we're going to get the exposure from public television. But it's funny. I've been watching some other documentaries about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and one thing that we were very mindful of when we created this film was to use art and not so many of the. I mean, there are way more horrific pictures, for example, of the disaster, piles of bones and skulls, and people with gaping holes in their faces, and just things you can't possibly look at. And so we were very careful not to include much of that because we felt like we didn't want to horrify people, and particularly with a mind to showing it to middle school and high school age students, that they're at a very formative age, and we just didn't want that to be, we didn't want it to be a horror. We wanted it to be something that really spoke to them on more of an emotional issue, from a more emotional place. And so, but we're busily trying to get it out there, and we do have a distributor who is primarily for schools and community groups and that kind of thing. So they're also doing a lot of promotion.
Thank you.
Oh. Yes, that's good.
I would just like to address the question of silence, and I've been looking into the silence because I'm Japanese American. We don't hear a lot about what happened. We don't learn it in school. We don't learn it in college. I ended up a journalist. I was at NPR for 10 years. I was encouraged not to talk about this, and I was actually had many journalists who said this kind of thing does not happen in the United States, and we don't do this kind of thing. And so the other side, I looked at what happened to Japanese people in America. And so that's the other side. You're doing what happened to Japanese people in Japan. I did And I was told this by New York Times editors to go find my own story. So there's shame on the other side as well. We are encouraged not to speak up. They actually teach it in school, and it's happening at our local Great Barrington.
What are they teaching?
Well,
Or
there's
not
a,
teaching?
there's a lesson plan saying that it was justified to drop the bomb, and it's in 10th graders, and there's a whole instruction thing. It goes about like 6 pages, and it has a picture of the bomb, and it has a poodle. It says Patty the poodle will give you spit out the straight facts, and this is what they're teaching in Massachusetts, in Great Barrington. To the 10th grade student got this, and the parent came to me, and he wanted to talk about it, but when he found out that no other parents would speak up, he said, I'm scared. And when I brought it to the principal, they said, well, no teacher has complained, so you don't have any children in school, so that's it.
Look, ever since we dropped the bomb, there was a big campaign to convince Americans not to feel bad about it, and it is a myth, by the way, that the bomb ended the war. The Japanese were trying to surrender in July, and in fact, I just found out this week that when they tested the bomb in New Mexico in July of '45, there were the weather conditions. The guy who was running the testing, the weather conditions were completely wrong to test the bomb, and there was no wind, which they had hoped would blow all the radiation away after the testing and whatnot. But Truman was going to be in some international meeting where he wanted to know this bomb worked. And they were like, it doesn't matter about the testing, just do it. Do it now, I need this information, And so, we have our own hibachi here. There were 1,500 people in the immediate area, the surrounding area where the bomb was tested, who all died of, radiation-related diseases. The people who worked in the factories, the mines that mined the uranium. I mean, there is a long, the downwinders, of course, those people exist all over the world, from where bombs were tested for the UK and France and all of that, but we have them here as well. And all of these stories have been very suppressed. And then when the bomb was dropped and there was blowback, Dwight Eisenhower said, we did not need to do this. This was a horrific thing. He was very upset, as were other generals. We won this war, we didn't need to drop that bomb. And the scientists had also drop it someplace private, meaning an uninhabited island, and that was not heeded. There were people in the administration who had developed this bomb since 1942, and they were determined to show the extent of the damage that could be done. And it was really not to end the war, it was at the beginning of the Cold War, and it was to show the Soviet Union. We got this, so it's a very, very complicated story, but there's been this whole campaign, Setsuko, that doesn't want to be told. And actually, we need to not talk about that now, because really what we want to talk about is how can we get more people behind the idea that we're going to get the world rid of nuclear weapons. And that's really what our film is about and what our focus is. So we can talk about the other issue privately.
And also that I'd just like to add that, of course, we're going to talk, people will ask about historical facts. Everybody has a different opinions about that war, but we are not here to do that, because I am not interested in talking about history. Everybody has a different interpretation. I am here, we made this film because there is a movement to let people know what is the humanitarian consequence of nuclear weapons. What does nuclear weapon does to all of us and our children, our future generation. So we want to grow our movement by knowing what happened, regardless of the historical interpretation of what the World War II was about, and so forth and so on. So I think in response to that, let's say, any, how to call it, a conflicting opinion, I just would like to share this story. So this is something to appeal to people's heart. And for me, even though I come from Hiroshima, my family survived from the atomic bomb, and yet I was very unconscious about the issue. Meeting Setsuko was an awakening experience. I found out and said, oh my God, I can do something. So that's the whole purpose of this film. I just wanted to share with you. Sorry to interrupt your raising hands.
If you don't mind, there's a gentleman in the back who has on a military hat, and I'd like to hear from him. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, I wanted to say, first of all, I commend you for doing this film and to bringing your free voice to the world and to all of America, because this story needs to be told, especially since both sides, as you pointed out, suffered. My dad was in the occupation army of the United States in Japan, and he was helping those people who were affected by the radiation. He was in the U.S. Army Medical Corps, and he also did X-ray. He was an X-ray tech. And my mom told me, because he died at age 36. Wow. So I was only 18 months old. But she told me that at that time, he was taught to go into the X-ray area and to actually hold the people while they were getting X-ray. So you can imagine how many times my dad did that, unknowing, like you people, of the effects of the scatter radiation and the radiation effects. And at that time, they didn't have potassium iodide. And as Ronald Reagan said, there we go again. We should all have potassium iodine in our families' homes and in our cars. Because at any time, lest we forget, in a blink of an eye, we could be faced with the same predicament that these people were faced with. So, I think that we should take heed.
Yes, and well, thank you so much for sharing your personal experience. Thank you.
Trust in the light of the Lord, and He will lead us, and He's the only one that's going to solve all this, but your good works do not go unwarranted.
Thank you so much.
How about this gentleman?
I think part of the story of suppressing the long-term effects of radiation, all you need to do is study what happened in Chernobyl, where 35 people died immediately from radiation, but the long-term effects, that whole area of Chernobyl will last for probably 200 years, where it used to be a city and now it's deserted. So it has long-term effects on population and young people too.
That's true. Yes, go ahead. You were going to ask a question before.
I was wondering about your grandfather and more of his story after the bomb, and he was healed, I assume, and then what happened to him? What did he do after that?
Thank you for the question. Well, I was a little bit too young to really, I never really spoke to my grandfather about what really he experienced. I wish I were, but I was too young. He basically retired from the public position in 1948, and he stayed in Hiroshima. He didn't go back to Tokyo. He stayed in Hiroshima, started his private practice. And between 45 to 1950 or so, during that fierce rebuilding time, a lot of doctors, mainly private practitioners, started to have this monthly meeting, research and information exchange meeting, so that they can handle the whole new nuclear radiation illness and so forth. So that he was very involved in working with the practitioners in the area.
all the way in the back.
All right, thank you. That was really inspiring, so thank you for presenting it to us. What can we do to counter the Nikki Haleys in America?
Start from China.
Could you repeat the question?
Yes, sure. Yeah, the question was, how do we counter people like Nikki Haley, who really was representing, I mean, obviously herself, and she may be a candidate soon for president, who knows, but also representing the Trump administration. You know, it's extraordinary to think that Trump was the president when this ban treaty actually went into effect, but I don't think that he was really paying attention to it, although I do think he did really serious damage by just minimizing the importance of, or the impact of nuclear weapons. You know, when he was like, yeah, we're gonna make little bombs, and you know, the little bombs that we're talking about are the size of the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima, because the bombs that we now have are, in some cases, 1,000 times more powerful. So they, you know, they killed, what, 100,000, let's say, roughly, in Hiroshima. They could wipe out New York City and the entire 50-mile radius of, you know, with the certain of the size of the bombs that we have now. So, you know, but how do you counter this narrative that it's, you know, that the bombs protect us, and that these, you know, these very smart countries, including China and Russia, are going to protect all of us by their balance of power with how many weapons they all have. And we're big participants in this myth, you know, let's just say. And how do we counter that? Well, there are smart people, including this guy, Chris King, who's going to speak next week, who understand that we need to eliminate nuclear weapons. It's a long journey, and none of us in the movement are naive enough to think like, oh yeah, we're just going to flip the switch and they're all going to go away. But there are more and more reasons to want to eliminate them. Terrorists and, you know, can have access. You know, so what they need, we need a groundswell, and we need education, and we need the public to understand that this is an important issue. And just like we ignored climate change for, you know, since you probably all read that, you know, I think ExxonMobil had predicted what was going to be happening in the 1970s. And they didn't talk about it, and none of us paid attention, and here we are. And it's the same thing. You know, we have been getting by not having a nuclear accident, not having a nuclear conflict, and it's really dumb luck. It's not that we're so smart, it's that so many things have been near disasters, and we have, just by like luck, avoided those things happening. And so we need to get everybody mobilized, and that's what we want to do with our film. At least have people thinking about it and talking about it, you know? It's not going to solve everything, but there's stuff to do, and part of it is to let your legislators know you care. Let's make this important. Sir.
And to your point about education, for those of us that don't know, could you tell us a little bit more about the non-proliferation treaty that was passed, what its practical effects are, its status, are there enforcement mechanisms, or is it all voluntary participation? I assume the U.S. is not a signatory.
Well, I mean, there's two treaties. You mentioned the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and that's been in effect since 1976, I believe.
I'm sorry, the one that...
The one that just, TPNW, I know the initials, forget it. It's the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Do you want to speak to that, or no? Do you want to talk about where it's at right now? So just briefly, 122 countries have signed it, and I think currently 68 have ratified it, which means that they've put it through their legislation and the whole country has agreed to this. Yes, it's voluntary. They have found that, as one of the talking heads in our film, Ray Atchison, talked about, that they've had more, activists have had more success by not looking to the powers on that are seated on the Permanent Security Council in the UN, because they're all nuclear weapons possessing states. So they, even though, believe it or not, in 1946, The original charter of the UN was to eliminate nuclear weapons. Oh, what a good job we've done, you know? So now, again, working from the countries and the pressure, and a lot of these countries are also, well, here in the United States, for example, we're removing in certain cities money that used to go into like unions, you know, pensions funds.
Right?
Yeah, they're divesting. They're looking at all the different funds and they're divesting from any fund that supports the mining, manufacturing, or whatever of nuclear weapons. And so this is a kind of pressure that we can put on it, and it's a, in a way, it's a ground up, not a, you know, like the controlling countries down, because they're not going to do it. You know, so these are some of the ways that you can pressure if you have influence on, you know, funds like that in your company or whatever. Then there's ways to, you know, move funds away, and then that's how you create the pressure to get rid of these kinds of weapons. Yes.
Great job, Susan. That was really wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
I have a couple of questions. One for you and one for you.
Answer her first.
Yeah, okay. Did your dad have any health issues, any repercussions from his exposure? And the second question is, what happened to the painting? And the question for you, Susan, is you said something about having the film sent to high schools and colleges, etc. Are you going to give any talking points for discussion to the educators so that they could lead the students into, you know, following up on your mission and how they can do that?
Actually, Mitchie can answer all of this. Go.
Well, we have already teacher's guide we have created. And as far as my grandfather, I was too young to know if he had any impact. And my mother did have die of the pancreatic cancer, so that might have something to do with the radiation exposure. And what was the third
Sorry,
one?
I meant your grandfather. Was your grandfather
Right.
who did the painting?
Right.
He didn't have any health issues?
Well, he died of a stroke.
Yep. Oh, so not caused by his exposure to the radiation, right?
Oh, we don't really know.
Okay.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
And the painting?
Painting, it is displayed in the lobby of the Hiroshima Red Cross Hospital.
Oh, that's good.
Yes. Is that Marcy?
Yeah. Just to follow up on the question of the gentleman back, are there any signatories, people who have ratified, either signatories or people who have ratified it, that are nations that have had or were thinking about getting nuclear weapons? Have any of the nuclear weapons powers, or even people who aren't, we don't normally think of as powers, but people who possess or were thinking of possessing nuclear weapons, have they gotten rid of their weapons or changed their minds? Has it had any substantial impact on people who really are the ones who have the weapons?
The question is, are there any nuclear powers or nuclear adjacent powers that have ratified the treaty? And I would say that... I'm sorry, was somebody saying something? For example, South Africa actually was one of the few countries that actually had a nuclear weapon and got rid of them. And they have been huge proponents of the TPNW. They completely support it. It's interesting, the countries that have, like New Zealand is a big supporter, Mexico is a big supporter, but there are whole regions in the country that are, in the world, that are nuclear weapons-free zones. And those are growing. The Middle East, except for Israel and Iran, which, we all screwed that up, but, Iran doesn't have one yet, but they're making noise about getting them. But the rest of the Middle East has no nuclear weapons, and they've chosen that. So, South America, nuclear weapon-free zone. Most of Africa, parts of the middle of Indonesia and stuff, they're nuclear weapons-free zones. And they make that decision. They don't want to have them. And they're hoping that the rest of the world will follow. Let me ask somebody else who has
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, super. I think it's worth remembering that the United States set up a committee in September of 1944, 7-man committee, to investigate the social impact of the weapon that at that time had of course not been tested, and we didn't know it was going to work. But what if it did work? What would the social implications be? And they reported in June 45, so 6 weeks after FDR died, and about 6 weeks before the Trinity test in Alamogordo proved that the gadget, as it was called, would work. The conclusion of the committee, which was headed by a physicist called Joseph Frank, but had as one of its 7 members Leo Szilard, who was the person who first realized the possibility of a nuclear reaction that would, in the end, produce an explosion or produce electric power. The conclusion of the committee was that the use of these weapons was immoral. That there was no, it would be a socially consequential weapon, and the morality of making it was completely wrong. It should not be used. Truman and Stimson and all the other people involved in the decision-making decided to ignore that. But the reason I mention it is not just because of its historical interest. It's because of something that was going on in Britain when I was a youngster, and that was led by people like Bertrand Russell, unilateral nuclear disarmament. That one country should stand up and say, whatever the consequences politically, we, in this case Britain, should abandon nuclear weapons. Now, at the moment, if you like, you have the United States on one side and, put it crudely, Russia, China, North Korea on the other. You've got one other little scenario, which is India and Pakistan, and one further scenario on its own, Israel. I mean, that's it. One of those countries should, in my view, stand up and say no nuclear weapons. And the country, and I know this is going to sound incredibly naive thing to say, but I think it should be the country that was told initially in summer of 1945 that this was immoral, and that is the United States. And would it not be wonderful if a charismatic, photogenic character would emerge from the political landscape of this country and say, I'm going to run for the presidency of this country, and one of the things I am going to do, if elected, is to say, whatever the political consequences, and it is unlikely that we're going to be overrun by the Soviet Union, which no longer exists anyway, or China, or North Korea, we're just going to give them up. We're going to destroy the whole lot of them. I suspect that the American public would warm to that. Sure, there'll be gruff old timers who will say this is nonsense and, you know, better dead than red or whatever. But I think this movement could catch fire. And I wonder whether you agree.
May I say something? Sorry, I just would like to say, in response to what you say, this is my personal wish that I'm going to show this film in states like Arkansas, state like Mississippi, state like, let's say, Missouri, for example, because I feel these are the states of the United States where people are not given any opportunity to find out very important things. And I'm not American. And I've been living here, as you know. I left Japan. I left my mother to live here to pursue my life, right? This country has been such amazing country for me. In general, American people are quick in action. They have their own opinion, quick decision. I really believe in the power of American people. And because of that, I really want to go to the area of the United States that might be most adverse to this issue, and yet I really have such hope because of my experience that I have been here all these years. I don't mean to go off, but I really believe that United States, once Americans find out more about this, I know people are going to take action. Not like Japanese.
The young people.
Yes, but anyway, thank you, sorry.
Let me see. You haven't asked a question.
I was just wondering, you mentioned a guide for teachers that you have.
Yes.
Where can we get that so we can flood our school boards in the west, in Litchfield County, Dutchess County, where I am?
Get in touch with us. There are postcards around, and also out by the candy counter out there, we also have a place to sign your name, like a guest list with your email address, and but there are cards out there with our email addresses. So if you have questions like that, we'll be happy to set you up with those. You know,
Wait, can I just ask one thing? Can you just not shame Japanese people? Because I know a lot of Japanese people have tried to speak up, you know?
Okay.
You know, just don't shame, it's like...
let me just defend her. I mean, I think it's the Japanese government. It's not the Japanese people, but it's the Japanese government that just absolutely, they're under the American umbrella of defense. And they won't, you know...
No, I agree with that, so don't say Japanese.
Right, sorry,
or
yes.
Japanese.
Well,
that affects me.
Yes, okay.
I get, you know...
Okay, hold on, please. There's a gentleman way in the back, please.
Yes, has the movie been shown in Japan, and if so, what is the response?
It has been shown, theatrically released, and also the paid television, and then schools and conferences and so on. It has been amazing reception from the young students to 90-year-old hibakusha people. So it's been so wonderful to see how high school students are very mobilized about this because they feel very close to the issue because of the environmental impact and so on. But the most moving experience for me was that when I showed this movie in theater in Tokyo in the midst of COVID almost, several surviving hibakusha people showed up, and one woman came up to me and said that, Mitchie, thank you so much for making this film. I was very happy. I felt very rewarded.
I'll let the gentleman over there speak, and I'll come to you next. Thanks. Time-wise, I think we need to wrap it up too. But go ahead, sir.
I just want to say that thank you again, Nikki, for doing this film, and the director. Again, even though I kind of disagree with some of the statements that have been said, but that's okay. This is freedom, and that's why I'm so happy that you are putting forward. But is it not, I listened to Simon twice, and I heard what he said, but in the sense that, isn't it not quixotic that we are here trying to change an issue which we know is not going to change here? Now you can have your handsome so-called Antichrist come to say he's going to solve all of our problems, and yet we have to give total allegiance to that person, and, you know, like as if they are a god. We've been that route before, and like Winston Churchill, not Chamberlain, we followed what we had to do in order to have freedom that you enjoy and we enjoy today. Unfortunately, like David, my mother named me after David in the Bible, David did what he had to do with the stone that God gave him, and he slayed Goliath. Unfortunately, your people are good people. The leaders, okay, that we look to, and we say, you know, this one's bad, that one's good. You know, sometimes we make mistakes, and we all do. But thank you again, and I hope and I pray that we all put our faith in God, and He will prevail with us.
Okay, thank you. And, sure.
So I have a question for you. As people who've sat here and been moved by your documentary, what are 3 actions that you would really love for people who have seen this film to take? Is it donation, obviously voting, anything that you all have thought about as an intention for the film that we as watchers of the film could, instead of just leaving and getting something to eat and go home and watching a movie, something that we can take with us to move the action forward that you've started?
I have one that I'd like to ask you is that please talk to the schools or Board of Education so that young students have the opportunity to see this film early on. And that means it's all about the teachers. Teachers are the ones who make the most impact on students. So please talk to your teachers, educator friends about this film so they get to see it first. I think that would be something that I'd like to ask you.
Yeah, and I also think, for example, ICANN was, when we were making the film, had 465-ish groups that were nuclear disarmament activists, and now it's up to something like 680 worldwide. And so there are organizations that you can search out that are local and join. And then also, I think we need to let our, our politicians know that this matter. This is an important matter to us. You can count on one hand how many of our legislators, whether it's state legislators, House, or Senate, who actually talk about this. There's like 5, and that's it. And everybody else, it's like the third rail. Nobody wants to talk about it. It's this. I mean, in a way, I have to say, Putin did us a favor because he scared the bejesus out of everybody, and everybody's suddenly like, oh my God, nuclear weapons, we've got those, and oh my God, we could all be impacted, and yeah, we could. And I think my other takeaway is don't forget about this. That's the thing. It's a horrible issue. It's a hard thing to look at. And let's just, I implore you to not walk out the door and just have lunch, but to take this issue with you and talk about it amongst your friends. And let's have a groundswell of people who care and express that caring to the people who can do something about it. Because you would be surprised how small a group of people it was who got this treaty passed. I mean, it was extraordinary how they just worked the floors at the UN, worked the floors in different countries. A handful of people passed this legislation. And why do you not know about it? Because
Media,
yes.
That's
Setsuko says was the Washington Post here, is the New York Times here, and to Setsuko's point here in the audience, they won't touch it. And we have to make them want to talk about it. It is a type of censorship. It's self-censorship. And because, what else? These guys, again, I don't mean to, but the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about, man, are they powerful. And we are giving them so much money right now. Like, look, I support the war in Ukraine, but it's an adjacent war. It's really a war between the U.S. and Russia, but Ukraine's fighting it for us, and we're sending more and more and more weapons and spending more and more and more money on that. And it's, these are the things that we really have to start to peel back at, like, what are we really doing here, And we, the people, have to care. So don't walk out that door and go, ooh, that's so uncomfortable. I don't like thinking about this.
Japan has just increased its defense budget by
I'm well aware of it. And believe me, Setsuko's pissed off. She's upset. So, okay, yeah, we gotta wrap it up. So everybody, thank you so much for coming.